The transport ship, Valdris, rumbled through the asteroid field, its hull scarred from countless battles across the outer rim. Inside the cramped troop compartment, 47 alien soldiers from various species sat in uncomfortable silence, their weapons secured but their nerves on edge. The recent ceasefire with the Terran Alliance had been fragile at best, and now they were being transferred to the neutral station Omega-7 for what the brass called integration protocols. None of them knew what that meant, but they all suspected it involved working alongside humans. In the far corner of the compartment, almost hidden behind a stack of supply crates, sat what appeared to be a human child. She couldn't have been more than 14 standard years old. With short, cropped dark hair and pale skin that looked like it had never seen proper sunlight. Her uniform was regulation Terran military issue, but it hung loose on her small frame. Most telling of all, she wore no rank insignia, suggesting she was either a civilian contractor or the lowest possible enlisted rank. The Korthak warriors were the first to notice her, their reptilian heads turning in her direction with predatory interest. In their culture, children were protected until they reached maturity at 25. The sight of such a young human in military dress was both fascinating and disturbing. "Look at that," hissed Sergeant Vextar, his forked tongue tasting the air. "The humans are so desperate they're recruiting younglings now." His squad mate, Corporal Thane, let out a rumbling laugh that sounded like grinding stone. "She probably got lost and wandered onto the wrong ship. Where are her parents?" The girl didn't look up from the data pad she was reading, but several other species began to take notice. A group of Zalani, tall, graceful beings with 4 arms and crystalline exoskeletons, whispered among themselves in their musical language. The Braxians, stocky humanoids covered in thick fur, started pointing and chuckling. "She's so small," remarked Lieutenant Kozak, a Braxian engineer whose voice carried easily across the compartment. "My youngest cub is larger than her, and he's only 8 seasons old." "Humans mature slowly," added Dr. Yilzara, a Zalani xenobiologist. "But even by their standards, this one seems incredibly young to be in a combat zone." The girl finally looked up from her data pad, and for a moment her eyes met those of the assembled aliens. They were startling in their intensity, a pale green that seemed to hold depths of experience far beyond her apparent years. But she said nothing, simply returned to her reading. This only encouraged the commentary. "I heard human children are very fragile," continued Sergeant Vextar, his voice carrying a tone of mock concern. "Their bones break easily and they tire quickly. Why would their military send one here?" "Maybe she's a mascot," suggested Thane. "Some human units keep small creatures for luck." "Or perhaps she's lost," said Captain Mordun, a towering Urgok whose rocky hide was scarred from decades of warfare. "We should ask her where she's supposed to be. She might need help finding her way back to the civilian quarters." The girl's fingers paused in their movement across the datapad's surface, but she still didn't speak. This silence seemed to embolden the aliens further. What had started as curious whispers began to escalate into more open mockery. "Look how she's dressed," laughed a Nathari pilot, his tentacles writhing with amusement. "That uniform could fit 2 of her inside it. Did they not make child-sized armor?" "And those boots," added another Korthak. "She's probably swimming in them. How does she even walk?" "Hey, little human," called out Sergeant Vextar, his voice taking on a condescending tone. "Are you lost? Do you need one of the adults to help you find where you're supposed to be?" The girl finally set down her datapad and looked up again. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear, with an accent that suggested she'd grown up in the core worlds. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." This drew laughter from several quarters of the compartment. "Oh, she speaks!" exclaimed Thane. "And so brave, too. Tell us, little warrior, what's your assignment? Are you going to fix our computers? Polish our boots?" "Maybe she's a messenger," suggested Lieutenant Kozak. Humans do love their bureaucracy, probably carrying some unimportant papers from one desk to another. The girl's expression remained neutral, but there was something in her eyes that should have warned them. A coldness that spoke of things seen and done that no child should know. "I'm going to Omega-7 for the integration meetings," she said simply. This brought even more laughter. "Integration meetings," wheezed Dr. Yilsara, her crystalline body chiming musically. "Oh, child, those are for senior officers and diplomats. You must be confused." Perhaps she overheard someone talking about them, suggested Captain Mordoun. Children often repeat things they don't understand. The mockery continued for several more minutes, with various aliens offering their theories about what a human child was doing on a military transport. Some suggested she was a war orphan being relocated. Others thought she might be the daughter of an officer who had snuck aboard. A few even speculated that she was some kind of experimental human-AI hybrid, which would explain her small size and apparent composure under pressure. Through it all, the girl remained silent, occasionally glancing at her datapad, but mostly just sitting quietly with her hands folded in her lap. The transport ship's intercom crackled to life, announcing that they would be docking at Omega-7 in approximately 1 hour. This news seemed to energize the assembled aliens, who began gathering their gear and discussing what they knew about the station. Omega-7 was a massive construct built into a hollowed-out asteroid, serving as neutral ground for various species to conduct diplomacy and trade. It had been chosen for these integration meetings precisely because it belonged to no single government, and its security forces were made up of volunteers from dozens of different worlds. "I wonder what these integration protocols actually involve," mused Lieutenant Kozak as he checked his equipment pack. The briefing documents were frustratingly vague. "Probably just more Terran paperwork," grumbled Sergeant Vextar. "They love their forms and procedures. We'll probably spend weeks filling out questionnaires about our species' dietary requirements and sleep cycles." "Or maybe it's cultural exchange," suggested Dr. Yilsara hopefully. "Learning about each other's traditions and customs, the humans might be trying to build genuine understanding between our peoples." Captain Mordoun snorted, a sound like grinding gravel. "After 3 years of war, they're more likely planning to catalog our weaknesses for future conflicts." The conversation continued in this vein for some time, with various theories being proposed and debated. Through it all, the human girl remained silent in her corner, apparently absorbed in whatever she was reading on her datapad. As they approached the station, the viewing ports began to show the massive structure growing larger in their field of vision. Omega-7 was impressive even by modern standards, a roughly spherical construct nearly 50 kilometers in diameter, with docking bays, sensor arrays, and defensive platforms covering its surface like scales on some vast beast. "First time seeing it?" asked Thane, noticing the girl looking out one of the viewing ports. She shook her head slightly. "No." "Really?" he pressed, his curiosity overriding his earlier mockery. "When were you here before? On a school trip?" The girl's lips quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Something like that." Before anyone could question her further, the ship's docking clamps engaged with a resounding thunk that reverberated through the hull. The intercom announced that they had successfully docked at Bay 94, and that all personnel should gather their belongings and prepare for disembarkation. The aliens began filing toward the exit, their various pieces of equipment clanking and rattling as they moved. The girl remained seated until most of them had left, then gathered her single small bag and datapad before following at a distance. The docking bay was a marvel of engineering, with atmosphere processors and gravity generators maintaining Earth-normal conditions despite the artificial nature of the construct. A delegation of station personnel waited to greet them. A mix of species that included humans, Zalani, Korthak, and several others that none of the arriving soldiers immediately recognized. At the head of the delegation stood a tall human woman in an immaculate dress uniform, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her rank insignia identified her as a fleet admiral, one of the highest positions in the Terran military hierarchy. Beside her stood what appeared to be her aide-de-camp, a younger human male whose uniform bore the rank of commander. "Welcome to Omega-7, the Admiral announced, her voice carrying clearly across the bay. "I am Admiral Chen, and I will be coordinating the Terran side of these integration protocols. I trust your journey was comfortable." There were murmurs of acknowledgement from the assembled aliens, though several cast curious glances at the human girl who had traveled with them. She had positioned herself slightly apart from the main group, still clutching her datapad. "Before we proceed to your quarters," Admiral Chen continued, "I should inform you that there has been a slight change to our planned schedule. The officer who was supposed to brief you on the integration protocols has been delayed. Instead, the briefing will be conducted by—" She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found the girl. "Ah, there you are. I was beginning to wonder if you'd missed the transport." Every eye in the docking bay turned to follow the Admiral's gaze, landing on the slight figure in the oversized uniform. The girl stepped forward, her posture straightening almost imperceptibly. When she spoke, her quiet voice seemed to carry newfound authority. "Sorry for the delay, Admiral. I wanted to observe the integration group during transport to get a sense of their dynamics." Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. "And your assessment?" "They're still thinking in terms of us versus them," the girl replied, her pale green eyes sweeping over the assembled aliens with clinical detachment. "It's understandable given the recent ceasefire, but it will need to be addressed if true integration is the goal." The aliens exchanged bewildered glances. Sergeant Vextar stepped forward, his reptilian features twisted in confusion. "Excuse me, Admiral, but there seems to be some mistake. This is just a child who somehow ended up on our transport. She can't possibly be—" "Commander Sullivan," Admiral Chen said, her voice cutting through his protest like a blade. "Would you care to introduce yourself properly?" The silence in the docking bay stretched like a taut wire. The girl, Commander Sullivan, straightened her shoulders and stepped fully into the light. The change in her demeanor was striking. Where moments before she had seemed like a lost child, now she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to command. "Commander Sarah Sullivan, Terran Strategic Intelligence Division," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the bay. "Serial number 7749 Delta 9. I hold the rank of Lieutenant Commander in the Terran Navy, with special authorization for independent operations." The words hit the assembled aliens like physical blows. Several of them actually took steps backward. Sergeant Vextar's forked tongue flicked out nervously. That's impossible. You're just a child." Commander Sullivan's pale green eyes fixed on him with the intensity of a targeting laser. "I am 19 standard years old, Sergeant. Old enough to have served in 3 major campaigns and led decisive operations in 4 different star systems." 19? Dr. Yilzara's crystalline body chimed in disbelief. "But you look so young, even for a human." "Humans mature at different rates," Admiral Chen interjected smoothly. "Commander Sullivan's youthful appearance has often been tactically advantageous. Enemies tend to underestimate her, just as you all did during the journey here." The implication hung heavy in the air. Lieutenant Kozak was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "You were evaluating us. During the entire transport flight, you were studying us like specimens." "Like potential allies," Commander Sullivan corrected gently. "Or potential threats, depending on how this integration process proceeds. My job is to assess whether true cooperation between our forces is possible, or whether we're simply going through diplomatic motions before the next inevitable conflict. Captain Morden's rocky features shifted into what might have been a frown. And what conclusions have you drawn? Commander Sullivan consulted her datapad briefly before responding. Your species tend to organize around traditional military hierarchies with clear chains of command. You respect strength and experience, but you also have protective instincts toward what you perceive as the young or vulnerable. This suggests potential for successful integration, provided certain protocols are established. She gestured toward the assembled aliens with clinical precision. Sergeant Vextar, your commentary during the flight revealed tactical thinking patterns consistent with someone who's seen extensive ground combat. Your concern for my apparent youth, while misdirected, suggests strong unit cohesion values. Corporal Thane demonstrates similar patterns, with additional indicators suggesting expertise in urban warfare environments. The two Korthak exchanged glances. How had she gleaned all of that from a few casual comments? Lieutenant Kozak, she continued, turning to the Braxian engineer, your questions about station layout and technical specifications suggest a methodical mind well-suited to logistics coordination. Dr. Yilsara, your attempts to find scientific explanations for my presence indicate intellectual curiosity that could be valuable in joint research initiatives. Each alien she mentioned seemed to shrink slightly under her analytical gaze. Captain Morden, she said, addressing the towering Urgok, your skepticism about Terran motivations is actually refreshing. Blind trust between former enemies would be more concerning than healthy suspicion. Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. The commander's preliminary assessments will form the foundation of our integration protocols. Over the next several weeks, she'll be working closely with each of your units to develop optimal cooperation frameworks. Working with us? Sergeant Vextar's voice cracked slightly. But we thought she was a child, Commander Sullivan finished for him. Yes, I'm aware. It's a common mistake, and one that I've learned to use to my advantage. She moved closer to the group, her small stature suddenly seeming less like a disadvantage and more like a carefully maintained deception. During the Battle of Kepler Station, Zephyrian forces dismissed the young human officer coordinating defensive positions. They assumed she was a communications tech or perhaps a medic. They didn't realize until too late that she was directing the entire defense grid. Commander Sullivan's voice remained level, but there was steel underneath. 17 Zephyrian capital ships were destroyed before they understood their mistake. The aliens were beginning to look genuinely unsettled now. The siege of Proxima 7th, she continued conversationally, involved Hectarian ground forces who laughed when they saw a small human among the opposing command staff. They focused their attention on the larger, more obviously military figures. Meanwhile, that small human had already identified weaknesses in their supply lines and was coordinating strikes that would eventually force their complete withdrawal. Dr. Yilsara's crystalline form chimed softly. Those were you, weren't they? Among others, Commander Sullivan confirmed. The point is not to boast about past victories, but to illustrate why assumptions can be dangerous. You spent the entire journey making judgments based on incomplete information. She pulled up a holographic display from her datapad, showing detailed personnel files on each of the assembled aliens. Sergeant Vextar, 17 years of service, specialist in asymmetric warfare, decorated for actions during the Rim conflicts. Corporal Thane, demolitions expert, holds records for precision explosives, work in 3 different theaters. Lieutenant Kozak, graduated top of his class from the Braxian Engineering Corps, designed the defensive systems currently protecting 6 major installations. The list went on, each file containing details that should have been classified military information. How do you know all of this? Captain Morden demanded, his voice like grinding stone. Because gathering intelligence is what I do, Commander Sullivan replied simply. Just as each of you excels in your respective specialties, I excel in understanding patterns, motivations, and capabilities. It's not personal. It's professional. Admiral Chen stepped forward. The commander's expertise is why she's been chosen to lead this integration effort. Her unique combination of analytical skills, combat experience, and, shall we say, unconventional appearance makes her ideally suited to bridge the gap between our forces. But surely someone with more experience, began Dr. Yilsara. More experience than what? Commander Sullivan interrupted quietly. I've been in active service for 3 years. In that time, I've participated in major strategic planning for 12 different operations, led ground teams in 7 combat zones, and successfully completed 43 intelligence missions with a 0 failure rate. The numbers were staggering, especially given her apparent age. How is that possible? Whispered Thane. Humans mature quickly when circumstances require it, Admiral Chen explained. Commander Sullivan was identified as exceptional at an early age and fast-tracked through advanced training programs. Her first combat deployment was at 16. 16? Lieutenant Kozak sounded horrified. That's barely past childhood for your species. War doesn't wait for optimal ages, Commander Sullivan said matter-of-factly. When the Outer Rim conflicts began, we needed every advantage we could get. Some humans contribute through traditional military service. Others contribute through specialized roles that leverage their unique capabilities. She gestured to herself with a slight smile. My unique capability, as you've discovered, is being consistently underestimated. The aliens were quiet now, processing this revelation. Several were clearly struggling with the cognitive dissonance of accepting that someone who looked like a child had more combat experience than most of their veteran soldiers. I understand this is difficult to accept, Commander Sullivan continued, her tone softening slightly. Your protective instincts toward the young are admirable. They speak well of your species' values. But those same instincts can be exploited by enemies who understand how to appear harmless. She moved to stand before a large viewing port that showed the vast interior of Omega-7 Station stretching away into the distance. The integration protocols we'll be implementing over the next month are designed to help our forces work together effectively. This means understanding each other's strengths, weaknesses, and blind spots. It means learning to see past surface appearances to recognize true capabilities. Admiral Chen joined her at the viewing port. The commander has developed training scenarios based on her observations during your journey. These scenarios will challenge your preconceptions while building genuine tactical cooperation. What kind of scenarios? Captain Mordun asked warily. Commander Sullivan consulted her datapad again. Asymmetric warfare simulations where apparent weaknesses become strengths, intelligence-gathering exercises that require looking beyond obvious sources, command decision scenarios where traditional hierarchies may not apply. She turned back to face the group. The goal is not to make you think like humans, but to make you think more flexibly. In future conflicts, and there will be future conflicts, you may find yourselves working with or against forces that don't fit standard templates. Sergeant Vextar shifted uncomfortably. And if we object to taking orders from someone who appears so young? Then you fail the integration, Commander Sullivan replied bluntly. And your species gets classified as tactically inflexible, which affects resource allocation, strategic partnerships, and military cooperation agreements for the next decade. The implications were clear. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or wounded pride. Their performance here could affect the long-term relationships between their governments and the Terran Alliance. However, she continued, her tone lightening slightly, I don't expect that to be necessary. You've all demonstrated intelligence and adaptability in your previous service records. Once you adjust to working with humans who don't fit your expectations, I believe you'll find the experience educational. Dr. Yilsara stepped forward, her crystalline form catching the light in rainbow patterns. "Commander, if I may ask, what was it like, beginning military service so young?" For the first time since revealing her true identity, Commander Sullivan's professional mask slipped slightly. A shadow passed across her features, revealing hints of the experiences that had shaped her. "Necessary," she said quietly. The Outer Rim colonies were under constant threat. Traditional training programs took too long, and we were losing ground, literally, while our forces learned to adapt. Some of us had to grow up quickly so that others could have the luxury of growing up at all. The aliens absorbed this in silence. The weight of what she was implying, entire worlds full of children forced into early adulthood by the demands of war, was sobering. Admiral Chen placed a hand on Commander Sullivan's shoulder. "The commander's service has been exemplary under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Her methods may seem unorthodox, but her results speak for themselves." "Now," Commander Sullivan said, her professional demeanor returning, "shall we proceed to your quarters? I'd like to begin the integration protocols tomorrow morning. We have a lot of work ahead of us." The integration training began at 0600 hours the next morning in Omega-7's largest tactical simulation chamber. The room was a marvel of holographic technology, capable of recreating any environment or scenario with perfect fidelity. When the alien soldiers arrived, they found Commander Sullivan already there, standing before a three-dimensional display showing a complex battlefield scenario. She had changed into full combat gear, and the transformation was even more striking than her revelation the day before. The armor fit her perfectly, clearly custom-made rather than the oversized uniform she'd worn during transport. Her sidearm rode easily on her hip, and various pieces of tactical equipment were arranged with military precision across her vest and belt. "Good morning," she said as the group assembled. "Today we begin with a scenario based on actual combat data from the Rigel campaign. You'll be working in mixed species teams to accomplish various objectives." The holographic display shifted, showing a planetary surface with multiple settlements, defensive installations, and geographical features. Enemy positions were marked in red, with friendly forces in blue. "The scenario is this," Commander Sullivan continued, her voice taking on the crisp tones of a briefing officer. "A critical supply depot has fallen to enemy forces. Intelligence suggests they're planning to use it as a staging ground for attacks on civilian populations. Your mission is to retake the depot with minimal civilian casualties and prevent the destruction of vital supplies." Sergeant Vextar studied the tactical display. "Straightforward assault scenario. What's the twist?" "The twist," Commander Sullivan replied with a slight smile, "is that I'll be playing the role of enemy commander. I have access to the same holographic projectors, and I know exactly how each of your species typically approaches this type of problem." The aliens exchanged glances. Fighting against someone who had spent the previous day analyzing their thought patterns seemed like a decidedly unfair matchup. "Teams will be mixed species as follows," she continued, consulting her datapad. "Team Alpha, Sergeant Vextar leading, with Lieutenant Kozak and Dr. Yilsara providing support. Team Beta, Captain Mordun leading, with Corporal Thane and Commander Nethys from the transport." She continued dividing the 47 aliens into 7 teams, each combining different species and specialties. "You have 30 minutes to study the scenario and develop your approach. I'll be coordinating defensive positions during that time. Remember, this is not just about winning or losing. It's about learning to work together effectively despite differences in tactics, communication styles, and assumptions." As the teams huddled together to plan their approaches, Commander Sullivan moved to her own tactical station. Within minutes, the holographic display began showing enemy reinforcements, defensive barriers, and patrol patterns that turned the simple supply depot into a fortress. "She's not making this easy," muttered Lieutenant Kozak, watching red markers multiply across the display. Look at the patrol patterns, Dr. Yilsara observed. They're designed to counter standard Korthak infiltration techniques and Braxian engineering approaches. She's specifically targeting our species' preferred methods. Team Alpha huddled closer together. Sergeant Vexitar's reptilian features were set in concentration. She knows how we think, he admitted. So we need to think differently. What would she not expect? Meanwhile, Team Beta was having similar discussions. Captain Mordun's rocky hide scraped against the holographic control interface as he studied defensive positions. Her positioning suggests she expects us to assault from the northwest, the traditional approach for our species, he rumbled. But see here? She's left the southern approach relatively light, probably assuming we'll discount it because it requires crossing that river. Corporal Thane nodded enthusiastically. And if we could get explosives to this support structure, the whole eastern defense grid would collapse. The planning continued for the full 30 minutes, with each team developing increasingly complex strategies. They were adapting already, forced to think beyond their normal tactical preferences by an opponent who knew those preferences intimately. Time, Commander Sullivan announced. Teams Alpha through Charlie, you'll assault from your chosen vectors. Teams Delta through Golf will provide overwatch and respond to developments. Begin when ready. The holographic environment activated fully, creating the illusion of being on an actual battlefield. The aliens found themselves crouched behind cover, weapons ready, facing a fortress that looked absolutely real. Team Alpha made the first move, with Sergeant Vexitar leading a careful infiltration toward what appeared to be a weak point in the northern defenses. They had barely advanced 50 meters when hidden gun turrets opened fire, forcing them to dive for cover behind a rocky outcropping. "Ambush positions!" Dr. Yilsara called out, her sensors detecting the concealed weapons. She anticipated this approach. "Fall back to secondary positions," Vexitar ordered. But even as they moved, more hidden defenses revealed themselves. Commander Sullivan hadn't just predicted their preferred tactics, she'd predicted their backup plans as well. Team Beta fared no better initially. Captain Mordun's assault on the eastern defenses was met by precisely positioned obstacles that negated his species' natural advantages in close combat. Corporal Thane's attempts to place explosives were thwarted by countermeasures that suggested intimate knowledge of Braxian demolition techniques. For the first hour of the simulation, the alien teams were systematically outmaneuvered at every turn. Commander Sullivan's holographic enemy forces seemed to anticipate their every move, countering each strategy with devastating effectiveness. But then something interesting began to happen. Team Alpha, pinned down by overlapping fields of fire, began communicating differently. Instead of Sergeant Vexitar issuing traditional Korthak combat commands, he started incorporating Dr. Yilsara's sensor readings and Lieutenant Kozak's engineering insights into his tactical decisions. "Yilsara, can your scanners detect the power conduits for those turrets?" he called out. "Yes. But they're heavily shielded. Standard weapons won't penetrate." "Kozak, could you jury-rig something to overload them?" "If I can get close enough, and if I have about 10 minutes of uninterrupted work time." "Then we make you that time. Yilsara, start mapping their patrol patterns. We're going to create a distraction that uses all our capabilities instead of just mine." Similar conversations were happening across all 7 teams. Faced with an opponent who could counter their individual species' tactics, they were being forced to truly integrate their diverse capabilities. Team Delta achieved the first breakthrough. Instead of attempting a direct assault, they had spent 40 minutes observing and analyzing the defensive patterns. When they finally moved, it was with a coordinated approach that combined Urgok resilience, Nathari stealth capabilities, and Zelani technical expertise in ways that none of their species had ever attempted before. They punched through the southern defenses and established a foothold inside the perimeter. Commander Sullivan, monitoring from her tactical station, made a subtle adjustment to her forces. Instead of immediately counterattacking the breach, she allowed it to develop while reinforcing other sectors. She was testing whether the teams could capitalize on success as effectively as they were learning to adapt to failure. Team Beta, seeing the breakthrough, coordinated their own assault to support the advance. But instead of competing for glory, Captain Mordun specifically positioned his forces to cover Team Delta's flanks and provide supporting fire. "Well done," Dr. Yilsara whispered, watching the tactical display. "They're learning to work together instead of just alongside each other." The tide of the simulation began to turn. As each team started incorporating lessons learned from the others, their combined effectiveness grew exponentially. Tactics that would have failed when attempted by single-species units became devastatingly effective when executed with integrated capabilities. Commander Sullivan found herself having to work harder and harder to maintain her defensive positions. Her holographic forces were still fighting efficiently, but the attacking teams were no longer predictable. They were creating new tactical combinations that she couldn't counter simply by knowing their individual species' preferences. The breakthrough came when Sergeant Vexitar made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of pressing his team's attack on the northern sector, he deliberately pulled back and offered his team's support to Captain Mordun's assault on the eastern defenses. "Mordun, if you can break their line, my team can hold the gap, while yours advances on the primary objective." It was a subordination of personal achievement to mission success that was completely contrary to traditional Korthak military culture. Captain Mordun's response was equally unprecedented. Instead of accepting the offer immediately, he consulted with the other team leaders to ensure the redeployment wouldn't compromise other objectives. "Confirmed, Vextar. Delta Team reports they can maintain their position independently. Your support would enable a decisive push." The coordination that followed was beautiful to watch. 7 different species, with completely different military traditions and communication styles, functioned as a single integrated unit. They shared information seamlessly, coordinated attacks with split-second timing, and adapted their roles moment by moment based on changing battlefield conditions. Commander Sullivan's defensive positions began to crumble, not because her tactical skills had diminished, but because she was now facing an opponent that was genuinely unprecedented, a combined force that was more than the sum of its parts. When Team Alpha and Team Beta struck the eastern defenses simultaneously, supported by covering fire from 4 other teams and real-time intelligence from Dr. Yilsara's sensors, the coordinated assault was unstoppable. The simulation ended with the supply depot secured, minimal simulated casualties, and vital supplies intact. As the holographic battlefield faded away, 47 alien soldiers found themselves standing in the simulation chamber, breathing heavily and looking at each other with new understanding. Commander Sullivan approached from her tactical station, and something extraordinary happened. One by one, the alien soldiers began to kneel. It started with Sergeant Vextar, who dropped to one knee in a gesture of respect that was sacred in Korthak culture, reserved for only the most revered war leaders. Captain Mordun followed, his massive form lowering to the deck in the Urgok tradition of acknowledging superior command. Dr. Yilsara's crystalline form chimed in harmonious tones as she performed the Zalani gesture of intellectual acknowledgement, recognizing Commander Sullivan's tactical brilliance. Within moments, every alien in the chamber had adopted their species' most profound gesture of respect and recognition. Commander Sullivan stood silently for a moment, clearly moved by the display. When she spoke, her voice was softer than they had ever heard it. "Rise, all of you. You've earned something far more valuable than my respect. You've earned each other's. What you accomplished in that simulation was not just tactical success, but genuine integration." As they stood, Sergeant Vextar voiced what they were all thinking. "We understand now. You weren't just testing our ability to work together. You were forcing us to become something new." "Something better," added Captain Mordun. Commander Sullivan nodded slowly. Humans have a saying, "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts." Today, you proved that principle applies across species lines. You learned to see past assumptions, to value capabilities over appearances, and to trust each other with your lives. She paused, her pale green eyes sweeping over the assembled soldiers. More importantly, you learned that strength comes in many forms. Some of us are tall and imposing, others are small and overlooked. Some are experienced veterans, others are young but determined. The key is recognizing that every form of strength has its place in the larger picture. Admiral Chen's voice came over the chamber's communication system. Commander Sullivan, please report to the briefing room with the integration teams. We have just received word of an actual crisis that requires immediate response. Commander Sullivan straightened, her demeanor shifting back to full professional mode. You heard the Admiral. This was just the beginning. Are you ready for the real test? The response was immediate and unanimous. Yes, Commander. As they filed out of the simulation chamber, Corporal Thane spoke quietly to his teammates. We spent an entire transport flight mocking a child soldier. Turns out she was the most experienced combat leader any of us had ever met. And the most effective teacher, added Dr. Yilsara. She didn't just tell us how to integrate, she forced us to discover it ourselves. Sergeant Vextar was the last to leave the chamber. He paused at the doorway and turned back to look at Commander Sullivan. Commander, if I may ask, how many other children like you are there in the human military? Commander Sullivan's smile was enigmatic. Enough. Sergeant, more than enough. As they walked toward their first real mission together, the 47 alien soldiers were no longer seeing a small human in an oversized uniform. They were seeing their commander, someone who had earned their respect not through intimidation or traditional displays of power, but through tactical brilliance, psychological insight, and the rare ability to forge unity from diversity. The integration was complete. The real war was just beginning.